WWE games have gotten a bad rep lately. WWE 2K20 was widely panned and mocked as being a low point in the series, and the WWE's future effort looks, well, downright creepy. It's kind of reminiscent of WWE All-Stars but without any of the charm. Action figure style visuals have been replaced with weird bobblehead character models that make me shudder. In reality, WWE All-Stars looked strange, but it was a pretty decent experience, except for the abysmal PS2 version of the game. Anyway, WWE have done a lot of experimenting and innovating in the past, and it hasn't always worked out. In fact, most of the time it's resulted in video game disasters. In this video I want to chronicle 6 WWE games that set out to be innovative in some way and ended up being, in my opinion, some of the worst WWE games ever released. Next time anyone moans about WWE 2K20, they should be required to play these stinkers first. Number 1. Micro League Wrestling from 1987. Widely heralded as the WWF's first video game, it represents a rocky start for the pixelated wrestling world. The game starts off slow, but promising enough. We get introduced to protagonist Hulk Hogan. The rendering is a bit low resolution, but hey, can't blame the game for the technological limitations of the system too much. After that, we get to experience the entrances of Randy Savage and Hulk Hogan, complete with halfway decent renditions of Pomp and Circumstance and Real American. After that, the gravity of the game really hits. Here is the actual game. Yes, there's no character sprites to speak of. Instead, you have to pick an action from your limited list of commands available, triggering a, dare I say, primitive cutscene in the central panel. More accurately, a new, incredibly pixelated image appears, but they're so oversaturated, low resolution, and so few in number that they become an eyesore after only a short while. You'll see the shot of Hulk Hogan over and over again, I promise you. The game essentially plays more like Top Trumps than a wrestling game. All you have to do is pick a move and hope it wins out against the opponents. I don't know the logic behind the picking of moves, but there's only a small selection to choose from, and it hardly feels as action-packed as one would want from a wrestling game. The only sound to speak of is the ambient noise of the crowd, which gets grating after only a few seconds. The only entertaining thing on screen is the commentary by a rather stoic-looking Jesse Ventura and perpetually surprised-looking Vince McMahon. Occasionally, the central image changes to something barely distinguishable. I'm guessing this is meant to be a shot of a rather glum-looking crowd. I did notice one weird little piece of commentary by Ventura. Is the game knowingly nodding and winking at the smart marks out there? And that, my friends, is it. The game ends and Howard Finkel, may he rest in peace, announces the length of the match before the winner. Imagine if that was actually a reality in the WrestleMania main event. Wrestling games sure have come a long way. As with most old-school PC games, there is a dizzying number of versions of this game with lots of subtle and not-so-subtle changes, but honestly, they all stink. Number 2. WWF In Your House from 1996. Before the dawn of the 3D era, it's fair to say the WWE struggled to find a wrestling game formula that consistently worked. One of the better received 2D games was WWF WrestleMania from 1995, a game that felt very much like a beat-em-up, specifically Mortal Kombat, with its digitised character models. WWE took a formula that worked quite well and turned it all the way up to 11. I present In Your House. Named after the semi-annual pay-per-views, the game takes its name very literally, plonking WWF matches in a variety of different and exotic households. This game isn't actually too bad per se. It's a slice of decently fun, fast-paced beat-em-up action, but it's just utterly bizarre. WWF WrestleMania might well have been cartoony, but at least it took place in an atmosphere befitting of the WWF. In Your House feels like an awful fan game in comparison. Take a look at The Undertaker's level, or his house I guess, for example. There's a guy hanging from the ceiling over there. Kinda reminds me of when Taker hung the Big Boss Man. Must be something he does on the regular. British Bulldogs level is full of so much stereotyping it'd make the level designers of Street Fighter blush. Welcome to London. An Ultimate Warrior is in this game. Billed as being from parts unknown, his stage is a barren Mad Max style desert full of extras from Highlander and Conan the Barbarian. Who are these people? I genuinely love to know. Busy, ugly graphics and ridiculous levels and set pieces destroys an otherwise half-decent beat-em-up game. The line between cheesy but charming and cringy is an incredibly thin one, and In Your House falls firmly into the cringe pile. Number 3. ECW Hardcore Revolution from 2000. At the tail end of the height of their popularity, Extreme Championship Wrestling released a handful of games. The most well-known of which was this, ECW Hardcore Revolution, a game that is quite literally a facsimile, a clone of WWF's previously released efforts Warzone and, in particular, Attitude. Those games were bad enough with their blocky graphics, stiff movement and tedious Mortal Kombat fatality style input codes for every move. The codes slow down gameplay and require a genius level IQ to memorize. I mean, let's say you want to do Mike Awesome's Awesome Bomb finisher. You've got to press this combo. Okay, it doesn't sound too hard, but when every move in the game requires similar input strings, it suddenly puts a huge demand on the player to remember a massive amount of different button combos just to have a halfway competitive match that doesn't just devolve into punches and kicks. But while WWF games moved on to bigger and better things with the SmackDown series, ECW adopted an already poor engine. It felt like ECW served us fans sloppy seconds. The game is quite literally just WWF Attitude, but with a new roster of characters slapped on and a few new arenas thrown into the mix. I'm not exaggerating here, the game is the exact same as a year-old WWF game. As if the base engine wasn't bad enough, it certainly didn't suit the fast-paced, extreme atmosphere that ECW programming so carefully fostered and conveyed. There was also a Game Boy Color port of this game, apparently ranked as one of the 2 worst Game Boy Color games over at Moby Games. Like just about every 2D handheld wrestling game, it isn't very good. Number 4. WCW Backstage Assault, also from the year 2000. Back in the 90s, WCW had some pretty good games, arguably better than their WWF counterparts, but in their dying days, WCW squeaked out one final game that was probably their worst. WCW Backstage Assault. In a landscape where wrestling games were adding more and more features with each iteration, Backstage Assault scaled things back, revolving the entire game around hardcore matches. Robbing a game of the atmosphere of a ring with a crowd results in a lesser experience, and having every single match take place backstage frankly gets a bit tiresome. The matches feel terribly claustrophobic and hemmed in by this change. Every wrestler's moveset is severely hampered. There's no bouncing off the rope moves, no turnbuckle shenanigans, nothing like that. You can do quote-unquote high-risk maneuvers, like this very modest jump off a small wooden box by Kevin Nash, but it's just not the same as doing a top rope move. If you get far enough away from your opponent when on the hunt for a new weapon, you end up entering into a strange bird's eye view that is, frankly, a bit disorienting. Anyway, hardcore matches got tiresome when they became overdone on WCW television, and thus, this game also becomes tiresome the more you play. The game boils down to continually whacking your opponent over the head with sink basins and trash cans. It sounds fun on paper, but any longer than 10 minutes with this shallow shell of a wrestling game and it gets real boring real fast. Number 5. WWF Betrayal from 2001. In 2001, something truly weird and wonderful happened. The WWF released WWF Betrayal for the Game Boy Color, a scrolling beat-em-up game in the same vein as Double Dragon or Streets of Rage. Players could take control of one of 4 playable characters in a quest to save Stephanie McMahon from nefarious kidnappers to earn a title shot. In all honesty, the concept is strange but had potential. Playing a stone cold, stalking the streets and stunning thugs left, right and centre, surely that idea has some legs. Unfortunately though, the end result was a complete disaster. For starters, there's a brutally high level of difficulty. Betrayal is, in my opinion, the Dark Souls of WWE games. Then there's the overly simplistic repetitive gameplay. Although each wrestler can perform a finisher move, most of the time you'll just find yourself mashing the kick button. The worst offense of the game is the stun lock that the enemies have, particularly the machine gunners. Yes, I said that right. There are people in this game threatening to mow down the Rock Mafia style with guns. If they catch you with their fire and stun you, they can kill you in a matter of seconds as you stand there completely helpless. Oh, and the game has an ear-bleedingly bad, out-of-place soundtrack. Take a listen to this masterpiece and try and compare and contrast it with the sort of pulsing beats that help give Streets of Rage so much personality. There's also a real lack of imagination throughout. The levels are just so dull, though we do get to ascend Titan Towers towards the end of the game, just like Money in the Bank 2020. Anyone who wants to avoid spoilers for this awful experiment of a game should skip forward a few seconds, but the threadbare plot draws to a close when we find out that the whole kidnapping was part of one of Vince McMahon's nefarious plots in the end. Who would have guessed?
It's me, Austin! Oh, son of a bitch! What? It's me, Austin! It was me all along, Austin!
And number 6, WWE Crush Hour from 2003. In 2003, the WWE released its most bizarre game of all time, WWE Crush Hour. Cast your mind back to the late 90s and the brief popularity of the Destruction Derby twisted metal subgenre characterised by cars entering arenas to engage in gladiatorial combat. Now, imagine a very similar game but starring WWE wrestlers as drivers, and you've just pictured WWE Crush Hour. How this idea came to fruition is anyone's guess, but the result is both insanity and genius. The game was almost universally panned by critics upon its release, and for good reason. There's a lot of ridiculousness happening here, but the most hilarious thing is imagining good old JR Jim Ross sat in a sound booth recording lines about The Rock firing laser beams at Kurt Angle.
Stone Cold now has control of the Twisty Rockets.
Yes, all you do here is pick a wrestler, enter an arena, find weapons such as lasers and try to take out as many other cars as possible. It's like Mario Kart battle mode on steroids. Literally. The game also has one of the most bizarre, unbelievable openings of any WWE game I've ever witnessed. It turns out Vince McMahon has a monopoly over the TV airways. A power fantasy of his, no doubt. And this vehicular combat is just one of many crazy show ideas he has. Another one seems to be Kane's Barbecue. Who wouldn't want to play a game based on that idea? Maybe, just maybe, this is all one big self-referential joke about the abysmal failure of the XFL. Who knows?
The WWE in football. Nah.
In all honesty though, the game isn't terrible. It has some campy value and essentially does what it says on the tin. It's a monster truck style metallic mayhem game with a surprisingly deep roster. I mean, Billy and Chuck made it into this game, for goodness sake. For a bit of brainless, mindless fun, it's decent, but it's seriously lacking in any real depth or replayability. In all honesty, it also missed the boat, both in terms of WWE's peak popularity and the peak of the Destruction Derby subgenre by a number of years. Next time we're all communally preparing to declare a future WWE release as the worst WWE game ever, it's best to take a step back and remember that there's been some real unbelievable turkeys in the past. Thank you for watching all the way to the end. And if you enjoyed, please do leave a comment, give me a like, or consider subscribing for more gaming goodness in the future. If I missed out on any real stinkers, leave me a comment and let me know some of your worst WWE gaming experiences ever. Thanks for watching and see you next time.